Hello, I am Professor Kino, and welcome to my Office of Cinematic Antiquity. Today we'll be talking about... Let me be straight with you, I have never actually seen a Fast and Furious movie. Well, I did see parts of one once via someone else's screen on an airplane, so there wasn't any audio, but I don't really think that counts. And I know what you're probably thinking. How could it be that a cinephile who does movie reviews has never actually seen any of the films in one of today's biggest blockbuster franchises? And the answer is actually pretty simple, but will require a brief tangent, so bear with me. I was talking to one of my friends a little while ago about the fact that I have never seen an F&F film, and he broke it down for me like this. And I will be expanding on the conversation a little myself in hindsight, so if you happen to see this, Mike, I know you didn't say all of this. But much like how horror is a broad genre encompassing quite a few subgenres such as ghost, possession, slasher, monster, etc., the action genre is quite similar. For example, Mission Impossible films are action films for people who like spy thrillers, and Fast and Furious films are action films for people who like cars and racing. And here's the thing, I don't really care all that much for cars and racing. Thus, I have never been able to bring myself to see an F&F film. And I know that the later films have taken the franchise past its basic cars and racing roots, but it takes a few films to get there, and speaking critically, the franchise doesn't get all that great until the 5th film or so the whole thing seemed like too much to catch up on. But I have finally broken my streak with Hobbs Shaw. It is a spin-off, so technically not fully a legitimate F&F film, but for the sake of convenience, I will count it as one. Because of this, I think it's important for all of you to understand that as I review this film, I am doing so as an outsider to this franchise. So adjust your consumption of my review accordingly, because if you are a die-hard F&F fan, we may have completely different opinions of this film. Now, with that being said, seeing as how I don't want to ramble on for too much longer, how did I like Hobbs Shaw? Premise. After a deadly virus is stolen by an unlikely culprit, the CIA and MI6 work together to recruit Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw, despite their complicated past with each other, in order to retrieve the MacGuffin before it falls into the hands of the cybernetic super soldier Brixton Lord. Writing. This film is ridiculous, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a great B action movie, complete with an over-the-top main conflict, corny dialogue, quippy characters, wild car chases, impossible stunts, and superpowers? So let's break this down. First, the over-the-top main conflict. For a franchise initially about street racing, the fact that its latest installment is about the CIA, MI6, a super virus, a secret mercenary organization, impossible motorized magic, and a cybernetic soldier does make Hobbs & Shaw seem over the top. It's like the screenwriters imagined every basic run-of-the-mill action trope and just mixed it all up into a blender. And this film was the result, but concept is one thing, how was the whole thing executed? Well, to start that dissection, the dialogue. It's pretty corny. Anytime the plot is trying to move itself forward or include some forced deeper meaning, the chance that it is going to be groan-worthy is around 50%. For example, one of my favorites, well, at least there was one good thing that came out of this virus, it allowed you to reconnect with your family. And there are just a bunch of other moments like this, such as, I am human evolutionary change, bulletproof, superhuman. And the only way we survive this is by working together, like a team. So corny. On the other hand, when the dialogue isn't being corny, it's usually aiming to be very jocular, from Hobbs & Shaw's consistent quippy banter, which doesn't always land.
I see what you're doing. You think I'm stupid? Of course I think you're stupid.
No way. This guy's a real ass.
Through a handful of extremely hysterical scenes featuring some surprising and wholly welcome guest actors, and through attempts at being subversive and self-aware.
Who the hell are you?
Bad guy. 3 shocks will kill a man. There we go. It's a bad guy speech.
So all in all, the dialogue ends up being by and large fun, as it fluctuates from being head-shakingly corny to surprisingly smart. And while the balance isn't always perfect, the dialogue lightly entertains when it's happening. However, this is an F&F film, so dialogue and plot is only half the ride, with the other half being automotive action. And these sequences are spaced out nicely enough to make each one feel exciting and fun without being too much. And even better, each is high-octane and creative and should be enough for anyone itching for some solid car combat. Although it is far from being free from the ridiculous, and each scene features moments that are clearly gravity-defying and wholly impossible. But because of the nature of the rest of the film, I can't really shame Hobbs & Shaw for this because it fits thematically. And finally, the whole film goes even further with its ridiculousness in the form of actual superpowers. Not only is the villain Brixton Lore hopped up on cybernetics and other razzmatazz which allows him to pull off some insane things, but I wouldn't blame you for thinking that Hobbs and Shaw are similarly enhanced because of their ability to survive injuries and pull off stunts that no mortal being should be able to do. And of course, I wouldn't want to forget the main character's most powerful of superpowers, the ability to defy time itself. The whole movie has a time frame to it, that being the time until the virus gets released, but somehow the characters are able to get from London to Russia to Ukraine to Samoa and do so much in each country that I was consistently like, how in the hell are you doing this so fast? So yeah, Hobbs and Shaw is the poster child for modern day B-action movies. It's corny and ridiculous and full of impossibilities, but it's also very self-aware despite some occasional misfires, and in the end, pretty fun because of that. Acting. First, Hobbs and Shaw themselves, Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. For a modern B-action movie, it's hard to think of two better stars. Both are charismatic in their own ways, Johnson with his charm and Statham with his gruffness, and they definitely kick ass. They, in this movie in particular, with Just the Way It Is, reminded me of the action heroes of the 70s and 80s. Big muscles, one-liners, getting the job done through brute force, etc. They worked. Although neither of them do anything surprising. They're just Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. You kinda know what to expect going in. And I must admit that while their chemistry with each other worked well enough, their action-oriented partnership is far from my favorite in cinematic history. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that a lot of their banter appears to be ad-libbed, and I just don't think Johnson or Statham are stellar in that field. Their constant bickering and insult war didn't always work for me. But while the two leads were good enough for the film, the standout here is definitely Vanessa Kirby as Hattie Shaw. She's more serious than her two male counterparts, but she kicks just as much, if not more ass, and holds her own when going up against them. She just oozes coolness, badassery, and sex appeal effortlessly in a non-objectified way. And I thought she was fantastic. Her character is one of my new favorite heroines. Next up, Idris Elba as the villain Brixton Lore. He is clearly having fun in the role and makes a great B-villain. He's over the top, very shouty, very preachy, and a bit seen it before. However, Elba keeps all of those traits in check and makes a moderately fun villain. It's nothing that hasn't been done in countless other action films, but Elba makes that fact easily forgivable. And lastly, EizaGonzalez makes an appearance for about 2 scenes, and she is good enough. She felt very Bond girl-esque in her presentation, but a lot more independent and capable. She was nice to see, but I wouldn't call her contribution entirely memorable. Oh, and before I move on, there are 2 guest appearances that wholly surprised me and both stole the scenes that they appeared in. They are funny and wholly welcome, and stay longer than I thought they would, which made their cameos even better. Costumes, hair, and makeup. Costume-wise, the film isn't spectacular. You got your basic espionage stuff, military stuff, and casual action hero stuff, like beat-up khakis, t-shirts, boots, etc., that sort of thing. Everyone looks good in them, but nothing was surprising. Although Kirby did make every basic outfit look extremely fashionable, and she maintained some pretty memorable hair throughout the film to boot. Realistic? Not really, but she sure looked good. In hindsight, however, there are 2 costumes that kinda stood out to me. The first was Idris Elba's villainous outfit. It's very hipster motorcyclist, but it works for a B-action villain. To be honest, he looks a little like a G.I. Joe villain, but it's fun. And the second look that stood out to me was when Dwayne Johnson put on some traditional Samoan garb. In other words, when he put on a Samoan lava and took off his shirt. But let's be honest with ourselves, anytime Dwayne Johnson is shirtless and showing off his entire muscular majesty, it's quite the sight. Set design. It's odd. The film goes all over the world, but it's hard to think of a single standout set. While it goes from LA to London to Russia to Ukraine to Samoa, most of the film takes place in forgettable facilities or indistinguishable fields. I wouldn't go so far as to say that the sets are bad, but when a film features such a wide array of locations, you'd think that it would have done a better job at utilizing them as opposed to just briefly showing some iconic spots with establishing shots and then cutting away to a run-of-the-mill government facility or abandoned nuclear reactor or oddly empty mercenary headquarters. Choreography. With a director like David Leitch, who helped give us the first John Wick in addition to that stairwell scene in Atomic Blonde, long takes with beautiful choreography, you think he would have had a ball with a B-action movie featuring a ton of car chases and some classically styled action heroes. And this is true to an extent. There are moments during the action scenes that are great. My favorite one being a horizontal fight down the side of a skyscraper and the car chase that ensues afterward. There was also a great fight between Jason Statham and a room full of goons that is really entertaining. And yeah, the action in general is really entertaining and fun. And the choreography is good, but it's not as tight as it is in John Wick or during that goddamn stairwell scene in Atomic Blonde. Ugh. And this lesser quality is particularly noticeable when the action features a lot of people. For example, there is a bit of a battle near the end, and while there might be some good choreography in it, the editing makes it nearly impossible to tell. It's mostly just a lot of random punching. Maybe it was just a creative decision in the editing room, or maybe it was an attempt to cover up some shoddy choreography, but either or, it's just a step down from Leitch's previous work. Cinematography. The film looks fine, the action is framed in engaging enough ways to keep it all exciting, but other than that, none of the camera angles amazed me. The film just looks pretty basic, if I'm being honest. Editing. This is an extremely fast-paced film, and a lot of that has to do with the editing. Not only is the action at times rather choppy, but the scene transitions can come off as extremely clunky. For instance, there is a time when a character says that he has a plan and then BAM, the plan is in motion. But even worse, the film can sometimes just shift locations really suddenly. Like in one cut, our characters travel from Ukraine to Samoa. Just like that, like blam, we made it. It isn't difficult to follow what's happening, but despite this, the editing isn't great. I've seen much worse, but I've also seen much better. CGI. The CGI is fine, acceptable. The CG'd moments, such as cars pulling off wildly impossible and extremely dangerous stunts, never took me out of the film, and often led to some entertaining moments. But the CG tended to look quite obvious. It's pretty average stuff. Groundbreaking material this is not. Music. Just like how the film itself is styled after a classic B-movie, so is its soundtrack. Its inclusion of heavy rap hip-hop music brings back memories of films from the early 2000s. Racing films, primarily street racing, cool school films from the early 2000s. So the soundtrack is in line with the film's B-action movie styling and the franchise's street racing roots.
I'm hot just like a sauna, New York to California, too hot, too hot. See nothing like this, nobody do it like this. I'm on that next level.
Queste uno vale rap, fresh out the Mount Runner. Strictly for these youngins talking about they from the gutter. Talks are being lit but never spark like a funnel. Busy trapping on these songs but they never saw the gunner. Got lit microphones for about all your speakers. Move with the bars, always coming off the makers.
We go to war, going for mine, running out of time. You're coming for me, you better get in line. Get in line. You with the balls like Skywalker, creeping through the dark like a night stalker. I'm the runaway train, rolling on course. With the main source, bringing that pain. Do you want more? No, I don't want peace till I get justice. I know.
Direction. David Leitch is an interesting director. Beginning his career as a stuntman, he eventually transitioned into being a director along with Chad Stahelski when they collaborated on the first John Wick. However, unlike Stahelski, Leitch moved away from the John Wick franchise and onto various other projects. After first transitioning into another original film, Atomic Blonde, an adaptation of the graphic novel The Coldest City, Leitch quickly moved on to franchise films such as Deadpool 2 and now Fast and Furious presents Hobbs Shaw. And that speed from the first-time director to having 2 franchise films under his belt in 5 years is impressive. However, I also think that it might have been a little too fast. With Hobbs & Shaw, it seems like Leitch has lost a little of his finesse and voice, left in the dust, as you will. Because Hobbs & Shaw just feels like a run-of-the-mill classic B action film. If that's what Leitch was going for, good on him, I guess, but it doesn't really feel like a David Leitch film. It feels like it could be the product of many different directors. It has its entertaining moments, and it is a whole lot of fun, but it doesn't leave the same impression or have the same stylistic voice characteristic of Leitch's first 3 films. My enjoyment. I had a good time with Hobbs & Shaw. It's nothing amazing, but it is good summer popcorn fun. The cast is charming, the action is entertaining, and the story is ridiculous enough to be engaging. It does have problems, quite a few of them in fact, editing issues, the dialogue doesn't always work, it has a very seen-it-before plot, etc. But I was able to overlook these issues by the sheer fact that the whole experience is very clearly aiming to be a B-action movie. And being that, it works. Recommendations. If you are a fan of 80s action movies with their one-liners, big ol' muscular protagonists, and crazy rock'em sock'em plotlines, you'll probably dig Hobbs & Shaw because it was styled after them. Also, even with my limited knowledge on the matter, I think if you enjoy the Fast and Furious films, you'll dig this one as well. It will be a nice change of pace from the other 8 films, but still contain enough crazy car action to satisfy. It'll also be a good time for any fan of Dwayne Johnson and or Jason Statham, because they are as entertaining as ever. And it introduces us to a pretty kick-ass female action hero that goes toe-to-toe with Johnson and Statham in the form of Vanessa Kirby's Hobbs Shaw, if you're looking for something like that. However, if when you saw that David Leitch was directing this film and were hoping for an extremely well-crafted, amazingly choreographed action spectacular like John Wick, then I am saddened to have to be the one to tell you that this is not it. While it has fun action, the film is just riddled with so many other problems that you really need to just be in the mood for a high-octane, ridiculous, popcorn-devouring time at the movies to enjoy Hobbs & Shaw. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to add anything, feel free to leave a comment. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I am Professor Kino, and I look forward to our next discussion.